it's kind of counterintuitive because you think, well, if I'm hard on myself, then I'm going to be better. But in fact, it's going to make you not want to even look at yourself. And so again, back to just like very simple things, like we have a post-competition routine, and actually it can be post-practice also, where you're learning how to critique without criticizing. And this is definitely a skill set, right? Because if any of us bomb a job interview or anything, right, we're going to feel bad. Emotions are going to override. But if we can learn to step back and say, what went well? What didn't go well? What can I do better next time? That information is gold.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is a former Division I and professional basketball player. She is now a mental performance coach who has also helped launch the careers of over 100 other performance coaches. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Lindsey Wilson. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Nice to connect, and just excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you on and learn a little bit more about you. I guess to start to share with our listeners, love to kind of hear about what led you into the work you do and enlighten us on all the things that you're kind of doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easy answer is I really struggled with mental challenges in sports and felt really fortunate that I found a coach at a pretty young age. And, that really changed the trajectory of my life. I mean, it changed the trajectory of my sports career, which, that ripple effect. And then, of course, getting into this field. And I think throughout my career as an athlete, I just sort of looked around and, I'm going to date myself because I don't think it's exactly the same now. But, it wasn't that long ago. You'd kind of look around and you'd be like, okay, everybody's struggling with the same things. Nobody's talking about it, much less doing anything about it. And I was like, so who's going to do something about it? And not to say that there was nobody doing anything, because there were, but it wasn't mainstream at all.
Yeah.
And there was definitely the stigma, but I would say even more than the stigma, there was just the uh, almost like just a lack of awareness. It was like very much like the sink or swim mentality. And it was just like, figure it out or don't, because if you don't, someone else will. And I just saw a lot of my teammates struggling with it. And in the same way that I had, and frankly still was, I just had a toolbox. But really, it started at 16 years old when I was like massively struggling. I had big goals to play Division I basketball. It wasn't happening. I was in my own head, and my mom found me a mental performance coach. I mean, that's kind of, I'm here because of that, paying it forward.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I would say my experience asking that question to a lot of guests, people getting a mental performance coach that many years ago at that age
Yeah.
is pretty
Yeah.
rare.
Yeah.
What did that do for you? Reflecting back, what were some of do you remember some of the first like eye-opening aha things that were
Oh, yeah.
helpful?
Well, and I think this is where I see with so many of my either clients, my athletes, or the people that are training to become mental performance coaches. I think the best tools are simple, actionable. And I also think they're things that but you didn't know you knew. Like they're often things that you're like, oh, I actually have done that. I didn't know that I was doing it, or I was doing it in certain situations in my life, but not others. I wasn't intentionally doing it, meaning so I couldn't recreate it if I wanted to. I did it by accident, maybe. And so I think in some ways it's going to sound like massively corny, but I think sometimes these tools are a little bit like coming home. Like you learn them, and I think the really, really good ones are not the ones that like hit you over the head and you're like, oh my God, I've never even considered that. Like, what a revelation. It's more like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, and that works. And so for me, it was really simple things. It was, well, one thing that I will tell you that was a little bit of a mental jump for me, but it still felt right, was the idea that you can be extremely hard on yourself and push yourself and have high standards and be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Now that was like, and that's like one of my favorite sort of what am I trying to say? Like pivot points in someone's career as an athlete where you're not going to get to, I know you've worked with a lot of high level athletes. You don't get to the high levels not having sort of that gene of like, I'm going to push myself. I mean, maybe there's massively talented people. I don't know any of them, but like maybe, but for most people, they have that nothing's ever good enough mentality. And it does get you pretty far, especially if you have some talent.
Yeah.
And then you hit the wall and it doesn't really get you very far at all. And so that was something that I remember learning. And then there was other things, just like positive self-talk. I kind of already knew that I always joke that like I knew I was the problem, like I was in my own head when I was playing. I didn't know that I was the solution. And so like being able to train your brain to think in a different way, those were all like really crucial life lessons that I learned at a
Yeah.
really young age.
Yeah. I like that you said called it home kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like hearing you say that I don't find it corny, probably. But I think yeah, hearing that it's also this like it brings you within yourself and the
Yeah.
things that are authentic and the things you can control where outside of home sometimes usually that's not the,
Yeah.
the analogy, I guess. But can you talk about how being our authentic self leads to our best performing self?
Oh man, yeah, that's a deep one. I think well, I mean, I think any athlete, when I work with an athlete, generally they've played a lot of games. I mean, even more so now, right? Even if you're talking about a youth
Right.
athlete,
Yeah.
like let's take a basketball player, like they've played in tournaments for months, if not years, not quite a decade yet, probably, but like they've had a lot of games.
Yeah.
And I think when you're really thinking about authenticity, you're thinking about the times that you've played your best and really figuring out sort of that kind of like flow state or just like one with your sport, um having that sense of not being separate, and that goes for team sports in particular too, like with your teammates, just like having that connection. And that connection can be to yourself, that connection can be your teammates, to your sport. It can be just to effort and just showing up with all of yourself. And so that I think is the authenticity that comes from playing. And that's generally, in my experience, you may call it something different, but that's
Yeah.
generally what people are chasing.
Yeah. No, I like that. It's well said. Um, Besides the mental performance coach you had as a teenager during your career, was there another coach that kind of stands out that had kind of just a greater impact on your life beyond sport?
Oh yeah, there was two. So when I was 26, I started working with a hypnotist. So he was not a sports coach, he was a hypnotist. And so I got really into hypnosis. And I always call him my graduate level degree because my first was like learning about just, basic sports psychology, basic mental performance training. I'm not trained I don't have degrees in any of this stuff, but I learned from these different people.
Mhm.
And I would say first level was this coach at 16, and graduate level was Dr. James Hollingsworth. He's a
Okay.
hypnotist out of Boise. Um, but that was from the mental performance side. From a coaching standpoint, hands down, Katie Abrahamson Henderson at University of Georgia. She's the head coach there now. Um, it's like people that have played at any level, really, they have that one coach, and she's that for me. Like that just saw in me something. I mean, she could literally say anything to me and I'd be like, "Yes, coach." Run through the brick wall. "Yes, coach." Like even to this day, like I just have so much respect for her, and because she does it in the right way. Like she has very high standards, but she like cares about her players as humans. And yeah, she was the one that, I mean, she also changed my life because she brought me to Iowa State and I wasn't getting recruited super highly.
All right.
Um,
So I didn't know you're Cyclone.
I am.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was down the road. I was a Purple Panther. So
Okay, cool. Nice.
yeah,
I didn't know
so
that.
got an Iowa connection. Good to know.
Yeah, cool.
No, those are great. You said earlier too when you're talking about how our athletes and just humans we can be hard on ourselves. And I think a lot of times when I have an audience of athletes, I'll ask them the question, "Hey, who's the toughest critic in here?" And pretty much every hand goes up. And
Hmm.
following that with, who's their biggest cheerleader? and their hands go down.
Right.
And I think how can we, you mentioned kind of that self-talk earlier, but how can we help, because I think there is that thing of, yeah, we want to hold ourselves accountable, but also be kind to ourselves and have that balance of the right space. But how can we help athletes kind of, yeah, you want to hold yourself to a standard in your values, but also be your biggest cheerleader and have that.
Such a great question. I mean, I think of a couple things. I think about how much the research shows that our brains overemphasize the negative, and that's really across disciplines, right? I mean, you look at marriage advice and the Gottman Institute, and you'll get different opinions depending on the research. But from my experience, it's about 3 to 1 to all the way up to like 8 to 1 as far as to even out the positive statements versus negative. And of course, a lot of those are directed in interpersonal relationships. Like if I'm saying something negative to you, Tyler, you're going to overemphasize me saying something negative or critical. But it works on the inside too. And we've all heard we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts in our head every day. So if the majority of those are negative, it is going to have an impact. But I think at the root of all that is the emotions of it, right? All change comes from emotion. So we can like pay attention to all the research and like all of that gets our motivation up to make change, but it doesn't actually make the change for us. And I think when you're really talking about the motivation to change is understanding that our brain really gets uncomfortable with negativity. And so like, for example, we teach a process, and I actually learned this from James Hollingsworth, was the difference between critiquing and criticizing yourself. And so as high performers, we have to evaluate. Like there's zero chance you're getting good at something without evaluating.
Right.
So if you are overly emotional about evaluating yourself, guess what? You're going to stop doing it for most people, unless they're masochist, right? So they're going to stop doing it and they're going to find other ways to deflect that emotion, whether it's their coach's fault, it's their teammates' fault, it's, society's fault, whatever it is. And they're just going to stop looking in the mirror, basically. And so I think it's what's really important. And this kind of goes to some of the research as far as like grit and resiliency and failure and the process over the result. And all that kind of weaves into this idea of like, if you are too hard on yourself, you're going to stop. It's kind of counterintuitive because you think, well, if I'm hard on myself, then I'm going to be better. But in fact, it's going to make you not want to even look at yourself. And so again, back to just like very simple things, like we have a post-competition routine, and actually it can be post-practice also, where you're learning how to critique without criticizing. Yeah. And this is definitely a skill set, right? Because if any of us bomb a job interview or anything, right, we're going to feel bad. Emotions are going to override. But if we can learn to step back and say, what went well? What didn't go well? What can I do better next time? That information is gold. But most of us don't want to see it. And I will include myself in that. Like, I know how to do this, and half the time I quote unquote forget, right? Because it's massively uncomfortable. But if you're taught that and you do it and you practice it, it does get easier. And then then you're not in the emotions of like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person, or I'm a terrible basketball player, or I'm the best basketball player. Like we're not in any of that. We're on evaluate.
Yeah. Can you talk about the importance of having kind of those post-practice and post-game tools like that? Because I think a lot of times when I experience with coaches is, ask your kids what they're thinking about after practice, and most of them are going to tell you probably a mistake.
Yeah.
That's lingering in their mind, or the time you caught them making that, versus how productive what you just shared can do for us when we just learn. I think, what went well. I think what went well, why is one of the things I always throw in there. But can you talk about why? Yeah. And it's probably going to be uncomfortable if your kids aren't used to it, but they're going to get better at it. Can you talk about what that shift can do as far as just not only individual growth, but the team growth when you do it together?
Oh yeah. I mean, the so much of mental performance, I mean, I would say like the ripple effect, and I'm sure you've seen this with teams, is like the ripple effect of not only individuals having these tools and this skill set, but everybody on a team. It doesn't have to be necessarily a team sport per se, but on a team that everybody's doing it, including the coaching staff. It's like this this cultural shift where everybody's like, yeah, what we're doing is freaking hard. Like I think one of the things that I always, when I'm talking, let's say I'm going into a Division 1 team or, at one of the higher levels, I think one of the things that we have to constantly remind ourselves if we're at an elite level of really anything, but let's say sports, is what we are doing in that arena is so massively hard. Like it is a great privilege. And of course, now people are getting money and, they're getting all kinds, they're getting cars thrown at them. And like, that's all great. But the thing is, everybody understands that there's a lot of physical sacrifice, let's say, that goes into that. There's 5:30 a.m. conditioning, there's weight training, there's a lot of really difficult physical things that they're doing. But I think unless you're in it, and even sometimes even when you're in it in particular, because everybody else is doing it, you think it's normal. And in fact, there is such a psychic load that they're under, the pressure, the expectations, the pushing themselves every day. And so I think when you kind of come together as a team and are like, and again, I shouldn't say just elite athletics. I mean, any level is challenging because
Yeah.
that's if you're showing up to do it well.
Yeah.
Your varsity trying to make it to districts, right? Whatever you're doing, that's the whole thing of sports is like you're pursuing a goal together, and by definition, it's going to be hard. Otherwise, that's not really worth doing, right?
Right.
And so the psychic load of that is a lot if you care, and you should care. Otherwise, why do it? And so I think the cultural shift of people coming together and being like, this is really hard. There's going to be days we don't want to practice. There's going to be days when we've lost and we think we're never going to get any better. And we're going to be all pointing fingers. Like those moments are going to happen. And we fall back to these routines and these things that we've put in place as a team that really can help buoy up those times when it really sucks.
Yeah, I think you make a great point because I think often there is this like, I don't know what the word is, but don't quite accept the reality of what it is for all of us humans to be doing that process. And just acknowledging it together. I think, done exercises where have athletes, hey, what are the things that are holding you back? And then they share and it's like, wow, we're all
Yeah.
overlapping here in a Venn diagram of emotion.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
let's go through it together versus this go counterbalance it somehow in our life, in maybe an unhealthy way. um
Yeah, I mean, the
how,
feeling of being alone is one of the worst feelings. I mean, that our brain is hardwired to really
yeah,
avoid that. And the problem is when we feel
yeah,
that way, we feel like our problems are unique and different. We all kind of tend to do that anyway. And when we feel that, we tend to isolate more, which makes us more susceptible to feeling alone.
yeah. Speaking of harder and more challenging times, I always was kind of glad I didn't grow up in the social media era of sport. And you see the things. I was having a conversation a couple weeks ago with, and coach, people were kind of shocked. I was like, no, athletes are getting abused from gamblers like online. They're, placing bet on college sports, and then they're tweeting and Instagramming at these men and women that are just out there competing. And then, yeah, there's like commercials running during the NCAA tournament by the
I know, it's
NCAA, like,
disgusting.
and it's just one of the things of the elements of social media. What can athletes do to, I think, kind of create that, maybe that home or that, insular environment that's going to not hopefully put us into those things?
Oh man, I mean that's such a great question. I wish there was like some like magic button we could all push.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Like,
I mean, but I think to your point, it's like surrounding yourself by people that really know you. And I think normalizing the conversations about it, because I just think the ability to have criticism so publicly now is more than it's ever been. And we're talking about people whose prefrontal cortex often isn't fully developed either. And so, the pressure and the haters, if you will, that's like real. And so, I mean, I think that the only antidote to that is more support. I mean, there's no magic sauce. I think it's whether that's support, the family, friends, mental training, mental performance training, support staff. I mean, I think that's all really crucial. But I think the conversations in and around mental health, I mean, they're going in the right direction. I think there's more to it, but you see athletes really talking. I mean, Haley, what's her last name? The basketball player was talking the other day about her mental health challenges after the TCU game. And I mean, that would have been huge news 10 years ago, all the things she was saying. And now it's like that it's not huge news because it's more mainstream, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's so good because, young athletes are dealing with it at their high school or whatever. And so they get to see these older athletes going through it at whatever level they're at. And again, people don't feel so alone. And I think the conversations in and around it are just so crucial.
Yeah. One of the things I was going to ask you, because I know, yeah, you help develop other performance coaches. Why do we need more of them out there?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's so funny because we just finished our certification launch and, I do get the question like, is there enough business out there? And I'm like, okay, if you just go to like any sports event near you, like this weekend, and if there's a mental performance coach there, great. There probably isn't. And there's going to be hundreds of kids, thousands maybe, that don't have access to this. So yeah, sure. I mean, have the higher levels, Major League Baseball and even Division 1, have they like started having more of these resources? Absolutely. Thank goodness. But the fact of the matter is there's millions of kids playing sports, and I'm going to say that all of them need it, but all of them could benefit from it.
Mhm.
And so there's just a huge, huge need. I mean, I felt like I started in this field, 20 years ago, and it was a little bit of a blue ocean. Not that there weren't others. There were some of the ones we talked about earlier offline, but it definitely wasn't mainstream. There was a lot of like convincing people, and now it's like it's a thing, but there's definitely not enough of us out there.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there's in the high school space, you see a drastic shift in the number of coaches that aren't educators, that don't have degrees in child youth development. They're doing ABC by day, coaching at night.
Yeah,
And there's some amazing coaches that do that and are educated, but you're finding more and more that are ill-equipped to deal with some of the emotional challenges that sport brings.
sure.
They're
Yeah.
great on the court, on the field, in those things. But I think that is also just like you just look at the high schools. I wish every high school, I'm like, I ask kids, hey, do you go to your counselor's office? No. Would you go down to a sports performance coach? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to your point, I mean, I will say I believe in the transformational power of sports. Like that's why I'm here,
Big
right?
time.
And
Yeah.
I also believe that there is this very unique opportunity to get kids life skills with attaching it to something that they massively care about, right? Like how many kids are you going to get in math class to do mental performance training so that they get better at math? I don't know, not that many, right? You go to a sports event and like how many of them are really motivated to do something extra to get better in their sport? And those are the kind of things that like you can get them at this period of life where they care so much about their sport that you're getting in these life lessons, sometimes without them even knowing it.
Oh,
And some of
yeah.
that happens by osmosis, right? Like you don't need a mental performance coach to teach about discipline and hard work. But there's other things that not everybody grasps. And so that's why I'm here.
Yeah, no, I love it. One of the things I wanted you to share, if you could briefly about, wanted to learn about is braver visualization. Can you share a little bit about kind of
Yeah.
what that acronym is?
Yeah, so it is an acronym. So it's braver without the E. So it's breathing, a release, affirmation, visualization, and a reset word. And essentially and you can learn more on our website. I can give you the show notes, give you a link for the show notes. But essentially, um, probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, I was working with like a bunch of different teams. And, mental performance training can be a little like, if you're not careful, it can be a little nebulous. Like people don't know what to do on a Tuesday afternoon. They can read all the books, but they
Yeah.
don't know what to do with their team on a Tuesday afternoon. And they don't have unlimited time. And so essentially what I came up with was a pre-practice routine, and we call it the Braver. And it really brings in like so many of the concepts that we learn into a 5-minute routine. So obviously everybody knows breathing is important, being able to regulate your central nervous system, Super important. Anybody can do it. It's a great habit. It's a great way to connect with your subconscious. It's a great way to just kind of prepare mentally for practice. And the other thing is like a lot of coaches were expecting their athletes to be magically ready for practice without any sort of transition, right? So they're coming in and they had a fight with their girlfriend or the boyfriend, or they had a test, or they have a test later, or they had a fight with somebody or whatever. And so having that transition period to get their mind right is really helpful. So the breathing, the releasing, and that's just a little bit of like that thought management of just that transition from school or life onto the playing field. And it's like it's the practicing, I mean, it's really mindfulness. It's the practicing of non-judgmentally letting go of your thoughts. So whatever thoughts are coming in, you just let them go. You don't judge them. They're not important or unimportant. They're just not important right now. And so that can be really helpful. Let's see, an affirmation. We teach affirmations as a trigger for visualization. So they're essentially goals written in the present tense. I'm sure you teach something similar. And, I think that is so crucial because I think a lot of times coaches expect that athletes are connecting their practice and their physical sacrifice, let's say, and their physical work in that moment to their bigger goals. Some people do this naturally, some people don't. And so the more we can remind our brain, I'm here because there's this gap between where I am and where I want to be. So let's get my brain operating at the level that I want to be, not the level that I'm at right now. So they do a little visualization. And we also connect it to their reset word, which we use in a reset ritual or a mistake ritual that they can use in competition. And so it's like this little like salad that they can do for 5 minutes before practice. Oftentimes coaches do it also. And it's this mental warm up essentially that encompasses all of these different pieces that they would have learned already into a mental warm up.
Love it. Love it. You touched on the next thing I wanted to ask about because I think it's huge for young coaches and to help teach is that mistake ritual. And I was,
Yeah.
if coaches too, what are they doing when they're getting a little
Oh
dysregulated?
yeah. Or
I think it's,
parents.
yeah, everybody for sure. But can you share a little bit what a mistake ritual is and what it can do to help us move past? And I think, get to what's more important is the next rep, the next opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, I was a basketball player, so I've been watching the tournament and all that. Like, and I was trying to explain to my 9-year-old, like, basketball is such a game of momentum, right? Like, a couple turnovers here and there, a couple missed shots, like the other team's off to the races. Because there was like, I think it was a 20-point game, and I was like, that's not like impossible to come back from. You get some momentum, and anyway, with that is like basketball is made up of mistakes. Every sport is, right? And it's really not whether the mistakes are going to happen because we know that they are. It's what we do about them when they do happen. And everybody wants the magic sauce, like what do I say to little Johnny when he strikes out? Or what do I say to little Susie when she misses a free throw? And that's like parents, coaches, athletes, they're all kind of wondering this. And it's a little bit like asking to get better shape in the middle of the game. Like, I don't want to say it's too late to do something, but we really need to be doing it ahead of time because we've all tried the pat on the back. We've all tried the high five. And it's not that none of that helps at all. But the real key is that often when we make a mistake, our brain kind of gets hijacked and it goes, I call it the negative train. So if I miss a shot or make a turnover, especially if there's more than one, I'm thinking, oh my God, my coach is going to pull me. Oh my God, my teammates don't trust me. Oh my God, I'm not going to make the college scouts watching, but my dad's watching, whatever it is, right? And so my brain is off to the races and I'm stuck there like trying to play in a basketball game. And everybody's telling me not to think about it, or everybody's telling me it's okay, right? And I'm like, it's not okay, And so having something essentially to anchor yourself in those moments is gold. Now, what I will also say is there's no like magic word, there's no magic thing to do, but you do tend to make something feel magical the more you practice it. And so essentially what we teach is, and we call it a mistake ritual or reset ritual because it doesn't have to be just mistakes. You just want to get a lot of reps.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's the most powerful when you made a mistake. So essentially what we teach is a reset word or a phrase. So people can choose words, they can choose a certain animal. And that's really good for younger kids, when you're thinking about like if anybody's watched, National Geographic and they've watched, the cheetah hunting, like
Yeah.
if he quote unquote makes a mistake, he's not sitting there thinking about the mistake, right? And so you kind of use these things, or they might have an athlete that they really like watching and trying to think about sort of like thinking about how they would respond. So you're kind of trying to get them to anchor themselves with a word. We also have them take a deep breath, connecting to their body in that moment. And then we have them do some sort of hand motion. So again, all of these things together just really anchor them in this moment. And it's based on the principle that you can only have one thought at a time, right? You cannot think of of the cheetah and also think, oh my God, the scout's about to walk out of the gym. And, you can think about those thoughts simultaneously or right next to each other, but you can't think about it at the same time. So like having an anchor in that moment really allows you to kind of go have that next play mentality. And the more that athletes, and again, coaches love this because you weave it into your practice already. So there's no, I mean, you can teach it in a workshop, but it's pretty fast.
Yeah.
And then you practice it. So every water break, every time an athlete gets pulled out of a drill, every during stretching, whatever, you're practicing it every timeout, and the huddles, free throw, basketball player, free throws, anything. Yeah. And there's alternatives if you have a sport that isn't so like have so many breaks like basketball.
Yeah, you're running a track race, right?
Yeah. So you can make modifications for sure. But that's the idea. You have a word or phrase, you have a deep breath, and you have a hand motion. And it sounds like crazy simple, but when people really do it and a team, as you mentioned, like a team buys into doing it and a coach gets one, it's really powerful because it gives you that beat. Yeah. And it puts you in the driver's seat of your own emotion because that's the whole thing with momentum, especially is like it's an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
And the more we can regulate ourselves in competition, the more successful we're going to be.
Yeah, no, I like how you give the negative train. Cause it's like, yeah, the negative train, once
it's off.
Yeah, once it's off, it starts picking up people too, right? People, your teammates, they're like, oh, it starts to create that, the contagious thing that we don't want.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's like, yeah, I think to be able to stop it and recognize the train's taken off. What do we got to do? Very well put. As we wrap up, one final question. If we gave you a time machine and sent you back to teenage self, given what you've known now in your career and studied and all the things, what advice would you want to go back and share with yourself?
Oh my goodness. That's a hard one. Because I did feel like so lucky that I got this information at that time. I mean, I think that for me, so much of it was that balance of just like you're gonna be, it's like you're so focused on the goals. Like I wanted to play in Division 1, I wanted to be an All-American, I want to be a professional basketball player, I wanted to do all those things, and I'm so glad that I was that driven because it made me like work really, really hard. But I think the thing that is hard to understand when you're a young person is the journey is about who you are becoming through striving for it. It's like this sort of mental gymnastics that only when you look back, you're like, oh, it wasn't actually about the thing that I accomplished. It was about the fact that I fully went for it. And even if it hadn't worked out, which some of my goals did not work out, it's like, I am proud of myself for giving of myself. And that's who I got to become. That's the thing that